Perfect prayer. It's the simplest way. Okay, so first things first, the minutes kind of define what a chapter is and everything. So Ruth has passed or emailed the minutes. I guess everybody in favor of the minutes for December. Say aye. Aye. Very good.
There are a couple of corrections that I think she's got.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Ruth. You got something to say? No. No, okay, good, okay. All right, well, first off, I'd like to introduce our guests and welcome our guests, Ruth and E. Michael Jones, to the upper room. I'd like to first say, this is not easy material to understand. We're conversing. He's much more a student of history, and his book, Barren Metal, is certainly a read that it's not going to happen in a couple evenings. It's something that you really do have to study, as with other writings that he has. But let me give you a little bit of background for Ruth and E. Michael. So our guest speaker is E. Michael Jones. He was born May 4th, 1948. He's an American writer, former professor, media editor of Culture Wars magazine. Jones is known for his writings from a perspective which defends the Catholic Church in American society and overviews the decline of Catholic communities, which were assimilated in the secular American mainstream after the 1950s. He was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, born into a Catholic German-American family, and was raised a Catholic. He went to high school there, St. Joseph College, then obtained a PhD from Temple University, and began to teach at St. Mary's College of Notre Dame in Indiana. He found the college to be what was considered the opposite of what a Catholic college should be. It was pro-choice, it was feminist, and it was secular. He made little effort to conceal his views, which led conflicts with many in the faculty, his department chairwoman, and eventually the president. And though he was tenured, his contract was not renewed because he was a Catholic absolutist. So his writings are extensive. There's some books going to be sold in the back here. I recommend that. This is just one of many, many magazines or articles and speeches that he gives. He does a lot of talk radio, and his work is primarily concerned with the relationship between the Catholic Church and secular culture, particularly the effects of the sexual revolution of the church and the culture. Later work is focused on historical friction between the Catholic Church and the Jewish people. So his current talk, he is here as the foremost Catholic authority on usury. Jones has focused this topic and has written numerous articles examining usury and the wider economic issues. In 2014, I think the Fidelity Press published a seminal work on usury, and it's 1,300 pages, and its work is titled Barren Metal, A History of Capitalism as the Conflict Between Labor and Usury. And this morning, he's been gracious enough to drive down last night. We had a lot of good conversation, and he's going to discuss the conflict between labor and usury from his extensive knowledge. E. Michael Jones.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here on such auspices, under the auspices of the Dominicans, who are the intellectual powerhouse of the Catholic Church. Honored to be here. I've lived a charmed life. I have to admit it right now, and my wife can testify to that fact. And so I've had many honors. I once, I'm up here at the pulpit. I once preached in a mosque in Tehran. sat in the imam's chair and preached to those Muslims there. I had an even greater honor in Indiana when I was invited to talk to an Amish school up north where I live. This man sold us milk, and he was also the teacher at the school, and brought me in there, and I stood in front of those Amish kids. And I said, the only reason you're farmers is because of St. Benedict. Because he brought culture to the German barbarians who are my ancestors too. And I said, if it weren't for St. Benedict, you'd still be chasing pigs through the forest. And then I said that there was a Roman who was sent to the Danube, which was the border between civilized and barbarian country. And of course, my ancestors lived on the barbarian side. And he said, these are the saddest people in the world because they don't have grapes and they don't have olives. And I looked at them and I said, well, they still don't have olives, but they do have grapes. And they are no longer unhappy because they took those grapes and made it into wine, and wine makes you happy. And at that point, every single kid turned around and looked at the bishop back there, as if to say, is this true? Does wine make you happy? And if so, why aren't we drinking it? Again, as I said, it was an honor, again, to be here with the Dominicans. As I said, my wife and I were honored by staying at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington. Great honor. And the first night we were there, they had us to dinner, and there were about 12 Dominicans there. And they said, so what brings you to Washington? And I said, well, I'm going to give a speech at the National Press Club. Well, what are you going to talk about? Well, I'm writing a book. It's called The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. So that their ears perked up at that point. And I said, as a matter of fact, I just finished a chapter on Saint Raimondo Peñaforte. They said, you did? I said, yeah. I said, did you know about the story of him and Nicholas Donin? No, they didn't know that. So Nicholas Donin, this is in, by the way, the book, which I encourage you all to buy when you leave here. It's out there. But anyway, the story is that Rabbi Raymond Peñaforte met this rabbi and converted him to Catholicism. And at this point, he said, he told him about his life, and Raymond Peñaforte said, I want you to meet the Pope. So he brings him in, there's Gregory IX, and Rabbi Donin, the ex-rabbi, says to the Pope, do you know what's in the Talmud? And the Pope said, what's a Talmud? I never heard of it. And then he went into all the blasphemies in the Talmud, and the Pope is getting more and more shocked. And at a certain point he says, stop, stop. He turns to Raymond of Peñaforte and he says, if this is true, I want you to find out if this is true. You go confiscate those books of the Jews. And if what they said, what he says is true, I want you to burn those books. And at that point I turned to the Dominicans and I said, it's time to return to your original charism, which is burning Jewish books. So next night, one Dominican shows up for dinner. So that was that. And of course, what I didn't get to say was, after that happened, Raymond of Peñaforte turned to Thomas Aquinas and said, I want you to write a book. And he wrote the Summa Contra Gentiles. And then he turned to Raimondo Martini, you don't hear much about him anymore, and he wrote a book called Pugeo Fidei Adversus Judeos et Maurus, the dagger of faith aimed at Jews and Moors. Dominicans don't write books like that anymore, do they? That was my experience with Raymond of Peñaforte, and that brings us to the topic of my talk today, this morning. which is Jack Nicklaus, or Jack Nicklaus as you say. Does anybody not know who Jack Nicklaus is? Raise your hand if you don't know who he is. Everybody knows. Okay, he plays golf. Not only does he play golf, he plays it really well. And he won just about every single tournament that ever existed. And at a certain point in his life, and this is 2005, he decided to retire. Now he was not only made a lot of money playing golf, he made a lot of money designing golf courses. And at this point he made a fateful decision, which is going to be the topic of our talk. He decided to find out how much money he really had. And so he hired a group of advisors, and they sat together for months, and finally came up with a figure of $296 million. That's how much Jack was worth, according to their estimation. And at this point, Jack Nicklaus made a fateful decision. He decided to turn that into money. Now, they named a figure, but that figure was an abstract thing because it was just talking about a business he had created. He decided, I want that money. Now, this was a fateful decision because we're here to educate. This is what the Dominicans do. And one of the fundamental things everyone has to learn is that there's a difference between wealth and money. They're two different things, and that's what he didn't know that. You could be the richest man in the world, and if you're not smart, you'll end up like what the psalmist said, which is like the fool and his money will soon part. And that's what happened to Jack Nicklaus. So this is he filed it. He got involved in a big lawsuit as a result of doing this, and he said, I wanted my family to retain control of those businesses during my lifetime and beyond. So I decided to monetize a little less than half of the value of the business as part of estate planning for the benefit of my children and their families. Well, that's what he said. I think he wanted money. And I think he wanted to spend that money. Because there's so many things you can buy out there. You know, I played all that golf, now I'm going to cash it. It reminded me of the guy in the Bible who had a really good harvest, and he decides, I'm going to tear down the barn. And I'm going to build 2 barns. And life is going to be easy from now on. Now this guy is 65 years old, so you're not exactly starting off in life. It's not all that old, but you're not young anymore either. So anyway, they sat down, and then the team that came up with that figure started looking for a partner who would help the company grow beyond where Nicklaus had taken it. This is all the jargon that gets used. And so they found a man by the name of Howard Milstein, who owned Emigrant Bank and was willing to buy a minority share in Nicklaus's design and endorsement business in order to facilitate the transfer. So they came up with a plan, business plan. All of Nicklaus's course design, trademark, endorsement business plus smaller companies got bundled up, and then they were going to sell them to the new company, of which Nicklaus would own 51% and Milstein 49%. In exchange for granting Milstein 49% stake in his operation, Nicklaus would receive $145 million in cash. Now, what are you going to do with $145 million? Want to go to Walmart? Give me one of everything. I don't care how much it costs. Give me one. This is a man who didn't understand that money and wealth are two different things. You can go to the dictionary and you'll become more confused as well, because they will say it's wealth and it's what produces wealth. Well, they're two different things. Money and what produces wealth are two different things. All right, at this point it becomes really complicated. So it turns out that the $145 million which Nicklaus received for estate planning purposes was a loan. Oh, I didn't know that. Which bore an interest rate of 8.5%, granting Milstein the right to convert that loan to a 49% equity stake in the company. Nicholas had signed an agreement which, as he admitted in the legal affidavit, I didn't understand. I obviously did not understand or foresee what this would lead to over time. Blinded by the size of the payout, Nicholas failed to see that he had just saddled his operation with a $145 million debt at 8.5%. Not only that, he also agreed that the first $12.3 million of the company's net income each year would go to Immigrant Bank to cover interest. Golden Bear International, Nicholas's company, was entitled to the next $2.8 million of net income, quote, so long as the loan wasn't in default. Nicholas also agreed that his company would provide payment-in-kind notes, which amounted to a transfer of equity from Nicholas to Milstein, if the company did not have enough net income to pay Immigrant Bank all of the interest due at any point. Do you know what interest is? We're talking about compound interest, okay? Just to give you a shorthand of what that means, no force on earth can keep up with compound interest. There's someone in Venice wrote a story about if you invested, if $1 at the time of Jesus Christ at 5% interest, there aren't enough zeros in your computer to pay off that debt by now. Any debt, a floating loan, becomes unrepayable after 70 years. Unrepayable. Now, the man who wrote this article, this is an article in Sports Illustrated, by the way, that I'm basing this on. The man who wrote the article describes payment-in-kind notes as, quote, part of the higher math of financing, not for the faint of heart, but something that would have clearly been in Milstein's bailiwick as a graduate of Harvard Law School, a successful financier and owner of Immigrant Bank. And this is a polite way of saying that Nicholas was completely out of his depth when he signed this agreement. And Milstein intended to use the complexity and opacity of the agreement as a way of stealing Nicholas's business from him. Shortly after the deal was signed and the original payment of $145 million transferred to Nicholas in 2007, the economy entered what has come to be known as the Great Recession. Because the $145 million payout was really a loan, all of the risk landed in Nicholas's lap because there is no shared risk in a loan. This is the essence of the immorality of usury. There is no shared risk in a loan. If you take out a loan, you have the burden of paying it back. And if you don't pay it back, you lose whatever you have. It's different than stock, which means there is shared risk. So if you have stock in the company and the company has a bad year, you don't get a dividend. If it's a loan, because the investor is sharing the risk, there is no shared risk in a loan. This means that Milstein used the loan to whittle away at Nicholas's equity in his own company until finally Nicholas lost all control of his operation. So there's a lot of complicated back and forth. At a certain point, Nicholas discovered not only that he had no control of the organization that he founded, he also discovered that he no longer had the right to talk to potential clients. He couldn't even talk to people anymore because not only did this guy, Milstein, own the company, he owned Nicholas. This is what he said. And once Howard had permanent control of the company, he acted as if he owned me, Nicholas said in the affidavit. He tried to control every aspect of my life, from what I did to whom I spoke with to where I went, as if I were his property. I always tried to be respectful, but there was no respect in return. I also tried very hard to make the relationship work, but it became increasingly obvious that I had aligned myself with a person who didn't respect me as a human being. What did you expect? What were you thinking, Jack? On November 23rd, a Manhattan judge, what does that mean? Sided with Milstein and effectively ruled that Nicholas cannot use his own name, image, or likeness in connection with commercial ventures in which I am involved in the future. Nicholas was 82 years old when he filed his affidavit in May 2022. He was at the end of what everyone conceded was a fabulous career, but during the 6 decades it took to build up his company, Nicholas, in his own words, went, quote, from being the company's owner to being a disrespected employee. I made a deal that I thought would allow me to continue controlling the business I had built, but ended up signing an agreement that guaranteed Milstein ownership of me for the rest of my life. This is slavery. Jack Nicholas, famous guy, worth $296 million, and now he's a slave. In order to understand what happened to Jack Nicholas, we have to ask fundamental questions based on fundamental economic concepts like usury, labor, money, wealth, and surplus value. It's clear that Nicholas had no understanding of any of these terms, nor is this surprising, because you'll never learn about them. So I remember I started off as an educator, and then I thought I was going to be a writer. It turns out I'm an educator now, because I wrote, that's a textbook. That is the economics course you will never get in any institution of higher learning. If you want the philosophy book, course you will never get in any institution of higher learning, read Logos Rising. If you want the aesthetics book, read The Dangers of Beauty, because you can't get this anymore. You can pay a lot of money, and worse than that, you have to go into debt. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about debt. We're talking about usury. We're talking about compound interest. We're talking about slavery. There are people who are paying, I paid 10 years of my student loan, and now I owe more than I did when I started out. This is the slavery that an entire generation has been introduced to. And Jack Nicholas walked into it with his eyes open. It's clear that he didn't understand anything. So the first thing I had to learn when I did Baron Metal was economics is not physics. You don't have to be in nuclear physics to understand economics. Economics, when Adam Smith wrote his book, the famous book, The Wealth of Nations, he was a professor of moral philosophy. Economics is a branch of moral philosophy. There are 3 transcendentals, which are ultimate attributes, and also attributes of God. The good, the true, and the beautiful. Morality, moral philosophy, is how you achieve the good. This is what do we mean? Why is economics moral? Because the fundamental aspect, the ground level basis of economics is 2 people coming together, a buyer and a seller. That's what it's always going to be that. And in this relationship, the stronger of the 2 will always be tempted to take advantage of the weaker. And when the stronger takes advantage of the weaker, it's sinful behavior. And that's why this is moral philosophy. So forget about the physics. You know, you can spend your time trying to figure out what a derivative is and what a leveraged buyout is and all this other type of stuff, but it all comes down to that, and it all comes down to some type of moral decision. Economics is not physics. It's pretended to do that ever since the 18th century. When Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, Press on Moral Theology, I'm going to change everything. Because what he did, he turned it into Newtonian physics. So Newton believed that there were 2 forces in the universe, gravity and inertia. He got that from Empedocles, the ancient philosopher who said it was love and strife, which is the same thing as gravity as inertia. And Adam Smith did his own little magic here, and he turned it into self-interest and competition. That means that the universe is a machine, works all by itself, circular motion. That's what Newton believed. Adam Smith believed that the economic system was a machine, circular motion. If you have self-interest and competition, they rein each other in, and you don't have to do anything. Well, guess what? That's the exact opposite of morality, isn't it? Because morality means you do have to regulate your behavior. So he said this is the devastating effect that English ideology had on economics, and it's true to this day. Every economist pretends he's some type of scientist, and what he's really doing is creating a system where the wealthy can exploit the poor. That's the system we live in. So, wealth is an ambiguous term. Sometimes it means money. If you read the dictionary, it means money. Sometimes it refers to the thing which is the source of the money. Jack Nicklaus did not understand this when he accepted a payment of $145 million in exchange for 49% stake in his business. What is an alternative understanding of what wealth is? In his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki defined wealth as the ability to survive a certain number of days forward without working. Wealth involves not just money, it involves the generation of money. When it comes to wealth, Kiyosaki continues, money may or may not be important. For instance, if you have a lot of money, but at the same time you have a lot of debt and high expenses, you may not be wealthy. This is because you can only survive for a short period of time rather than a longer period of time. Aristotle recognized this difference. The ancients understood this difference. Aristotle said, money is sterile. Money is sterile. Money was created as a means of exchange to facilitate trade. Before the invention of money, trade meant barter, and barter meant complex and wearying negotiations about how many bushels of wheat equaled a side of beef, to give one hypothetical instance. Money solves that problem by becoming the common denominator or medium of exchange between any possible range of goods. In the 8th century BC, Gyges of Lydia created the first coin, which was a lump of precious metal with his image stamped on it. The image of the sovereign on a coin guaranteed both the weight and purity of the metal in the coin, thereby facilitating trade by making weighing and assaying the coin's metal unnecessary. Gold was intrinsically valuable, so was silver, and this confused the distinction between wealth and money. Money is a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a record of account. Gold is a very good store of value, but a very bad medium of exchange because it's too valuable. So I told Tim last night, again in Tehran, there was a contest about, essay contest about the first surah of the Quran, and the lady there won the contest. And the reward for winning the contest was 10 gold coins, solid gold. And I said, you have gold coins? She said, yeah, would you like to see them? I said, yeah, I would. She put that gold coin in my hand, and my hand immediately closed. And I couldn't get it over. That's what gold does to you. You never want to let go of it. Once you get it, you never want to let go of it. So could you going to take that coin and put it in a vending machine to buy a Coke? No. And you're not going to circulate it. So what happens is, with gold, it immediately disappears from circulation because no one wants it to circulate. As a result, there's no money. And because there's no money, there's no economic exchange. And because there's no economic exchange, everything collapses, everyone becomes poor. That is the history of gold and the history of the gold standard as well, and why it's not a good idea. Okay, Thomas Aquinas understood this as well. Thomas Aquinas was influenced by Aristotle. He knew that Aristotle said that money is sterile. And so he gave up this analogy. He said if you put 3 gold coins in a drawer and come back 6 weeks later, you'll still find 3 gold coins. If you put a male and female mouse in a drawer and you come back 6 weeks later, you'll be running little mice all over the place. Coins do not copulate. Money does not produce wealth. Money must be used to purchase labor in order to produce wealth, because labor is the source of all value. According to Adam Smith, it was not by gold or silver, but by labor that all of the wealth of the world was originally purchased and is valued to those who possess it. Who want to exchange it for some new production is precisely equal to the quantity of labor which it can enable them to purchase or command. Now that's a radical statement. And it's so radical, Karl Marx agreed with it. But then again, so did John Locke. And then later, Pope John Paul II said the same thing in Laborum Exercens. Why would people, obviously Karl Marx and John Paul II are opposite ends of the spectrum. So Adam Smith is the opposite end of the spectrum. Why did they say that labor is the source of all value? Because it's true. That's the only reason they all said it. It's true. Nature is the product of God's labor. Remember, God had to rest after he created everything. He was so tired. Had to rest on the seventh day. That means he was working. That means nature is labor. Nature is obviously valuable. Land is a source of wealth, but land can only produce value through the application of labor. Man did not create the deer in the forest. God did that. But in order to turn that deer into wealth, man must apply labor by killing and dressing the deer. Gold, from this perspective, is congealed labor. It takes a lot of labor to produce that little gold coin. A lot of labor. An ounce of gold, mister, says one of the characters in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, is worth what it is because of the human labor that went into the finding and the getting of it. That is the central tradition of Western economic thought, and no one knows it anymore. Largely because there is a group of people who are dominant in our culture right now who think that coins can copulate. Their paradigmatic representative is Shylock, the main character in Shakespeare's play The Merchant of Venice. When Antonio, who is a Christian, confronts Shylock by asking him if your gold and silver are ewes and rams, Shylock responds by saying, I cannot tell. I make it breed as fast. And then at another point he says, my ducats can copulate faster than Laban's ewes and rams. This is a direct attack on what Aquinas said about the mice. Now why did he say that? What's he talking about? How do your ducats copulate? Usury, compound interest. And so here we have the two options. There are only two options. You can have the Catholic option or you can have the Jewish option. Catholic option is that labor is the source of all value, or the Jewish option, which is that your ducats can copulate faster than Laban's ewes and rams. That means, let's reduce this to America. What does that mean in America? It means there's a conflict between Wall Street and Main Street. So in case you haven't noticed, we're on Main Street. The Midwest got powerful, turned this country into the most powerful country in the world because of the Midwest, because of manufacturing, because of institutions like the one that Tim is in charge of here. That is the creator of wealth. And the people of Wall Street were not happy about that. Okay, and there's been this constant battle back and forth between New York and, let's say, Detroit as the capital of Wall Street. Usury is more than just sinful. It's a form of covert economic aggression. Usury is the Jew's way of enslaving the Christian under the subterfuge of claiming to help him out of financial difficulties.
Can you repeat that?
Pardon me?
Can you repeat that?
Usury is the Jew's way of enslaving the Christian under the subterfuge of claiming to help him out of financial difficulties. And if you don't believe me, read Merchant of Venice. That is the distilled wisdom of the West in that play. Beautiful play. But Antonio, because he's a savvy Christian who grew up in one of the world's great financial capitals, sees through Shylock's ruse. Antonio says, if thou wilt lend this money, lend it not as to thy friends, for when did friendship take a breed of barren metal of his friend? Obviously got the title of the book from that. But lend it rather to thine enemy, who if he break, thou mayest with better face exact the penalty. So you're not my friend if you want to lend me money. Guess who didn't understand that? Jack Nicklaus. Jack Nicklaus apparently never watched The Merchant of Venice. If he had, he would not have entered into a financial agreement with a Jew who was willing to lend him money. This is aggression. It's not friendship. It's not business either. Heinrich Graetz, the father of Jewish historiography, said that the only thing Polish Jews learned from studying the Talmud was how to cheat the Goyim. Pope Benedict's great uncle, Georg Ratzinger, said something similar in his book on Jewish business practices called Jüdisches Erwerbsleben, Jewish business practices. Civiltà Cattolica, the official magazine of the Vatican in 1890, published a 3-part series on the Jewish question in which they dealt with this problem. There's a stunning conclusion to this article. It just knocked me off my chair. Any country that turns its back on the laws that were created by Christian kings for the Christian people will end up being ruled by Jews. And then they went on to say, this is the history after the French Revolution. This is 100 years after the French Revolution. They overthrew the Catholic king of France, and now they're ruled by Jews through usury. Not the only people who said this. There was a Jew by the name of Samuel Roth. He was a pornographer. He published pirated modern classics like Ulysses by James Joyce. That led to a Supreme Court decision that basically overturned obscenity law in the United States. He also published Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. And he wrote this book. It's called Jews Must Live. Okay? Now keep that in mind. This is a Jew who wrote this book. He said, he accused the Jews in this book of parasitism. They're parasites. Jews, quote, are a people of vultures, living on the labor and good nature of the rest of the world. So it's a tacit admission here that labor is what produces value. And the Jew steps in and he takes it over through usury. Like Heinrich Graetz, Roth tells us that the Jew takes delight in cheating the Goy. And this is a direct quote from Roth's book. To my innocent brain, it appeared that the whole purpose of a Jew in business was to get the best of the Goy. Goy is the Jewish word for Gentile, non-Jew. When the Goy has been cheated, business was good. When the Jew had just come out even, business was very bad indeed. For the greater the harm he had done in a business transaction with a Goy, the deeper appeared the narrative delight of the Jew to whom I was listening. So it's like insider conversations here. In his chapter on Jews and business, Roth describes a scenario which could have served as Milstein's template in dealing with Jack Nicklaus. After noticing the advertisements of a furniture manufacturer by the name of John Hanley and Son, Roth's fictional Mr. Cohen approaches Hanley with an offer, quote, to treble your business in 6 months' time. Hanley finds the offer intriguing and quickly falls into the trap Antonio avoided by borrowing money from a friend of Cohen, quote, who will supply you with the capital you need at moderate interest. In 1910, 3 years before the creation of the Federal Reserve System, 90% of all capital improvement in business in the Midwest were financed by profit, internal profit, Those people did not need loans. That's why Wall Street was upset. You had an operation, we don't need you don't need your money. We're making enough money, we can finance capital improvement without you. The Fed was created to destroy that system and implement Mr. Cohen's system instead. The Jew then tells Mr. Hanley that he has nothing to fear because Mr. Cohen will supply Hanley with, quote, the men, the money, and the new organization, and you will retain controlling interest in the business. Well, that's what Jack Nicklaus was thinking, remember? Lulled by Cohen's assurances, Hanley borrows the $500,000 he needs to expand the business along the new lines which the Jew has proposed. Before the Hanleys realize what has happened, everything about, quote, everything about them in stores and factories has been so completely changed that it is practically not the same organization. All of their old employees have been discharged. Does that sound familiar? You heard of outsourcing? The plague that went through Indiana when somebody bought up the business? The new faces about them are long and dark and burn with the eyes of a strange, lustful fire. The once prosperous, that's a quote, the once prosperous furniture manufacturer became, quote, a Yiddish colony the moment it took on Jewish debt. Hanley continues to sell furniture, but the more he sells, the more money he loses, largely because another Jew is undercutting his prices by reselling furniture which has been repossessed because the customer who brought it on credit, another Jewish innovation, fell into arrears on his payment. The main drain on Hanley's finances, however, is the interest on that $500,000 advanced to him by Reuben Samuels for the expansion of his business. Unable to keep up with compound interest on his $500,000 loan, Hanley is forced to hand his business over to his Jewish creditors. At this point, according to Roth, again, quote, the business remains the same, the name remains the same, but when the legal clouds have rolled away, it is discovered that the new president of John Hanley and Son is Mr. Isidore Cohen. The new treasurer is Mr. Reuben Samuels. The new secretary is Mr. Israel Isaacs. What has become of John Hanley, Sr. and John Hanley, Jr.? They are lucky if they have been permitted to retain clerkship in their own business. This is, of course, exactly what happened to Jack Nicklaus. Roth goes on to describe another hypothetical case involving a farmer by the name of Linton, who also wanders unknowingly into the Jewish usury trap and ends up, like Nicklaus, losing everything. After foreclosing on Linton's loan, depriving him of the poor 60 acres from which he had derived such a proud livelihood, Mr. Levy makes Linton another offer similar to the deal Milstein offered Jack Nicklaus. Quote, here in the inborn messianic qualities of the man Levy rises to stupendous heights. He places both hands on the shoulder of Linton. But you don't have to leave it all if you don't want to, he says soothingly. Why can't you and your wife remain on the farm and continue to run it as if it were your own? You can move into the smaller house, and when your children come back from college, they can help you run things. You won't mind occupying the smaller house, will you? I have some relations in mind for the bigger one, and they will work along with you gladly, happily, to make things hum on the farm. What do you say? The main thing which erased the cultural patrimony of the West on issues like Jews and usury is known as capitalism, which according to Heinrich Pesch, who is the source, the spiritus movens behind that book, Marinetto, is capitalism is state-sponsored usury. The only other definition that Pesch gives for capitalism is the systematic appropriation of all surplus value. Surplus value is the source of wealth. That is, we're talking about labor in its various stages. What do we mean by that? If we take a grain of wheat as a starting point, that grain must be planted, nourished, and harvested before it becomes valuable by producing more grain. At this point, a bushel of wheat has X value. When that wheat gets milled and turned into flour, its value increases dramatically. If the flour gets turned into bread, the value increases dramatically again. The increase at each stage of production is known as surplus value, which is the source of wealth. There's no other source of wealth here. That's it. At this point, bread has a price which is determined not by the amount of labor which goes into it, but by the market. And this is where Marx goes wrong, Karl Marx goes wrong, because he thought you could deduce the price from the amount of labor that went into it. You can't do that. You can't do that, because as I said at the beginning, everything revolves around that buyer and seller coming together. So you can, to give you an example, you could start a vineyard in Iceland. And you could put a lot of labor into that vineyard, and you would end up with crappy, expensive wine. So at a certain point, Pesch says, this is why God created diverse distribution of wealth. And so why are you producing wine in Iceland? Why don't you leave that to the Portuguese? Because they just plant it and it grows, and it's great wine and it's cheap. So I got an idea. You go fishing for cod. You catch the cod, you sell the cod to the Portuguese, they'll sell you wine. Everybody, that's true. This is absolutely true. It's known as trade. God intended trade to facilitate collaboration between mankind. You can exaggerate that, which is clear what the British did, and they came up with the doctrine of free trade, which will ruin any economy. You cannot have free trade is good, free trade is bad. And the person who understood this was Alexander Hamilton, who basically said that manufacturers should be protected. That's what led to the great rise of industry in America. Don't want that cheap cotton. Don't let that cheap cotton cloth into your country if you want to survive. I could tell you stories. I've been in Africa, in Kenya. You go to a marketplace and you see acres of used t-shirts. They even have a word for it. It's called mutumba, the Swahili word for used clothing. Those people know there was a time in Kenya where they grew cotton, where they manufactured cloth, and where they made suits, and they were wealthy at that point in their moderate way. All that is gone. So I met the chancellor of the Diocese of Bungoma, and he told me, my father put me through school because he grew cotton, and he had enough wealth to pay for my education. There is not one cotton seed in Bungoma now, not one, because all of that cheap t-shirt, all those t-shirts, every day a 20-ton ball of t-shirts rolls off a ship in Mombasa. And they break it up and they spread out, and they spread this all throughout the country. And as a result, no one has any wealth. And it's poor. And so at a certain point, the government awoke to this fact. All of East Africa woke up one day and they put tariffs on used clothing. And at that point, the Jewish rag pickers in New Jersey got upset. And when they got upset, they called Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin, another Jewish rag picker, and he threatened every East African country with sanctions if they didn't roll back those tariffs. And every single country caved in, except Rwanda. That's what we're talking about here. That's the system that basically enables the theft of surplus value and prevents people from developing their own economy and keeps them poor. That's why people are poor in Africa. The other reason is they can't mobilize labor. They don't know how to do it because they never did it. And so it's endless poverty. And I'm saying it's serious. I mean, it's serious poverty. I was fortunate enough to meet a nun who was studying at Notre Dame, and she took me to her family's shamba, her little farm in western Kenya, which is a beautiful place, like a big golf course. It's so beautiful, but you can start heading north, and it gets drier and drier and drier until finally you're heading toward the Sudan, and it's desert, and sometimes it rains and it floods, and sometimes it doesn't rain, and they can't plant crops, and they're starving. There's no question, they are starving, and it's been exacerbated by the Ukraine war, because they depend on grain from Ukraine and Russia, which is 40% of the world's wheat comes from there, and they're not getting the shipments. So it's a desperate situation. It's a life and death situation. So, back to surplus value. Only labor can create value. What is a business? A business is a machine or a tool which turns labor into money by producing a product. The difference between wealth and money is similar to the difference between an apple tree and an apple. If you sell the apple tree, or you sell the orchard, you get money in exchange, which means you no longer have a machine that will convert labor into money, because money is sterile. If you cash out of your business, you exchange wealth for money, which is sterile. At this point, if you want wealth, you have to start all over again by creating another machine which produces wealth by turning labor into money. Once money is removed from the business, it is no longer productive. This is precisely the lesson Jack Nicklaus had to learn in the expensive school of experience. He should have been here for this conference. Experience, Ben Franklin wrote, keeps an expensive school, but fools will learn in no other. I say that to my children all the time. And they get mad at me when I say it. Actually, Nicholas was even more foolish because he exchanged wealth not for cash but for debt, which is the economic equivalent of breaking into jail. This is also the moral of the story of King Midas. Everything he touched turned to gold. That's great. Except you're going to starve to death because you touched that food that became gold, and you can't eat gold. You can only eat food. And the only thing that produces food is labor. And you could use your gold to buy someone's labor, but you can't eat gold. So at the age of 67, after a successful career as a golfer and golf course designer, Jack Nicklaus accepted $145 million in exchange for his congealed labor. He chose money over wealth and ended up losing everything because money is sterile. If he understood what he was doing, Nicklaus would have realized that at the age of 67, he had condemned himself to start all over again and discover the machine which would turn labor into money. But he already had that machine. So what was he thinking? Well, no matter what he said in his affidavit, he probably wanted to spend the money so that he could buy luxuries, because there are plenty of people out there producing luxuries. Adam Smith explains this, that this is precisely what happened to the Scottish lairds. They had men at command who could turn land into money, while at the same time providing the laird with lasting wealth, but modest wealth. Lasting but modest. The laird received steady but modest source of income. Over the course of the 18th and 19th centuries, the laird found that the modest source of income did not allow him to buy luxury items like shoes with silver and diamond buckles. So he sold out his men for silver buckles. That's Adam Smith. That's not me. Adam Smith said that. He was there when it happened. He was there. He was at Cambridge when Bonnie Prince Charlie went to the Scottish lairds in the Highlands and said, "I'm the king," and they agreed with him, and they created an army like that, which got to within 40 miles of London, almost won, with simple swords, two-handed claymore swords. He sold all that for buckles on his shoes. And in order to get those buckles, he had to go into debt. So he lost everything. This is the story of the English aristocracy over the course of the 19th century. It began with the great victory of Wellington over Napoleon. The man who capitalized on that victory was Nathan Rothschild. His father in Frankfurt had gotten the wealth of the Prince of Hesse-Kassel, because Napoleon's marching toward the Prince of Hesse-Kassel. This is a guy who was in the mercenary business. It was the Hessians who fought against the Americans in Trenton. He made all that money. Napoleon's coming. I got to get rid of the money. Here, Amschel, Meyer, you take it and hold it for me. Meyer Amschel immediately sent it to his son Nathan. Nathan bet the farm. He bet the Prince of Hesse-Kassel's farm, not his own, on the consul. If Napoleon wins, the consul goes down. If Napoleon loses, the consul goes up. He had advanced information. He bet on the consul. He made a ton of money. Made his fortune right there. And you know what he did? What do you do? What does the Jew do when he gets a lot of money? He lends it to aristocrats who have land and no money. And those aristocrats all built these elaborate houses. You've seen them all on well, the movie version of Pride and Prejudice. All those films. They built them then, and oh wait a minute, I gotta pay it back. Oh wait a minute, this is compound interest. Oh wait a minute, I can't keep up. And so over the course of the 19th century, they've lost all of their land. So you have all these nobility who have titles and no land because they went to the Jew Rothschild and wanted silver buckles. Classic example of this is Winston Churchill. His father, Randolph Churchill, was a close friend of Natty Rothschild. We're talking 2 generations down the road now. Randolph ran out of money. Okay, plan A. I'll find a rich American wife. Well, he did that. Jenny came over. That's Winston's mother. We're still running out of money. I'll keep borrowing from my good friend Natty. Randolph died 70,000 pounds in debt to Natty Rothschild. Now, at this point, you have a crucial moment. Like, what are we going to do? Are we going to foreclose on the farm? No, I have a better idea. We'll go to Winston and we'll say, Winston, we're going to forgive the debt. And Winston Churchill became a slave to the Jews from that moment on. Could never stay out of debt. It was always a Jew who bailed him out. And so guess what we have as a result of that? Israel, State of Israel, Zionism, the Balfour Accord, World War I, World War II. There's a thread that connects with you. Read the book. There's a thread that connects all, that pulls all this together. All of the misery of the 20th century can be traced to that aristocrat running silver buckles and monetizing his property. Just like Jack Nicklaus. This is also the story of the development of economics in Europe. So the Medici, this is where the wealth production begins. This is the transition from the feudal Europe, where you owed labor, to the mercantilist Europe, where you owe money to pay taxes. Where am I going to get the money? Well, you have to go to the Jew, because he's the only one who has money, and he will happily lend you money at 43 1/3% interest, if you're lucky. So the Medici, they start off making cloth, just what I said. They become wealthy making cloth. They grind their workers. Florence is a sweatshop. It's one big sweatshop. You can't leave. You can't ask for a raise. You just grind the workers. And so they have the money, and what do they do with that money? They become bankers. What else are you going to do with the money? And we're going to imitate the Jews. We'll have to let the Jew do the petty stuff, like the pawn shop stuff. But we're going to be the Pope's banker, and that's exactly what they became. They financed one Pope after another. The Cardinals bought the elections. I hate to scandalize you, but that's what it was going on. And they were ready to do it again, and suddenly God intervened, and we had the Counter-Reformation. The Medici eventually went bust because they lent to princes, and guess what? The prince is not going to pay you back. And the only way you can get paid back is if you have a bigger army than the prince's army. And you don't have it, and so you lost everything. Okay, next family that comes along is the Fugger family from Augsburg in Germany. Exactly the same story. They start off manufacturing cloth. They get the money, and they get into banking. Now, the Fuggers, to their credit, did treat their workers better. This is the classic German story of how they treated labor better in Germany. But they still got involved in the same thing. So The Fuggers, now it's the Habsburgs. Habsburgs need money. 1492, the Fuggers make their first loan to the Habsburgs. 6%. They never charged more than 6%. They bragged about it. 1494, the Habsburgs come into the possession of every gold and silver mine in the New World. Mexico, Chile, Peru, all these places. It's all now Habsburg money. It comes pouring into the coffers of Spain and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Austria. And in 1555, the Habsburgs go bankrupt. How can you go bankrupt when you own every single gold and silver mine in the New World? How can you do that? The answer is compound interest. No one, no force on earth can keep up with compound interest. It's not natural. It's unnatural. There, and at 60 years, that curve, it's a curve that goes like that, and then it shoots up, and then you can't pay it off. This is the story of Europe. It's the story of the whole sad story of how wealth, real wealth from manufacturing, gets taken over by finance and then destroyed through usury. There are only two options. There's labor and there's usury, and that's it. And the battle in our culture, in our country, is the battle between Main Street and Wall Street. And that's the battle between Christians who make things and Jews who deal in usury. And over the course of the 20th century, Henry Ford was replaced by who? Ivan Boesky. I could name all of those corporate raiders. The people with the leveraged buyouts from Wall Street. The best example I can give you is a video. It's on YouTube. It's called When Mitt Romney Came to Town. It was made by Newt Gingrich. Came out, I think, in 2016. And Mitt Romney, he's a Mormon, but he acts like a Jew. Shows up. He's with Bain Capital. Bain Capital buys up a paper manufacturer in Marion, Indiana, and loads them down with debt, and then takes huge fees, and that company goes belly up. When I was in South Bend, Indiana, when Donald Trump ran for election the first time, it was the biggest crowd in the history of South Bend. And it was all people who had seen better times, you know? Too much Pepsi, too many cigarettes, too many lottery tickets, too much of that type of stuff, and they don't look good. And the advanced man comes out and he says, you know, trying to get the crowd moving, what about that poor white woman who got killed by an immigrant in San Francisco? And nobody reacts. And what about that? And nobody reacts. And then finally he says, what about Carrier Air Conditioning moving its plant to Mexico? And at that point, everybody explodes. Everybody's on their feet because this is the issue in Indiana. We are being robbed of our manufacturing base because it's being sold out to these Wall Street vultures just the way Samuel Roth described in that book. It's sold out to these vultures and they turn it into money. And the minute they turn it into money, they destroyed your wealth. They destroyed that wealth. They destroyed your job. And that's the fundamental issue. We're still facing it today. And we've got lots of problems, but that's what we're facing. We're facing it today. We are now left to pick up the pieces. We're all like Jack Nicklaus now, in some sense or other. We didn't have that kind of money, but we're stuck with the same consequences. And so, this is Roth's description of the aftermath. If Mr. Linton had thought through that, thought before that he had been reduced to the final stage of humiliation, he now knew that he had been mistaken. All of the ruthless scheming of the Jew, all his apparent unaccountable hardness had been directed towards this one terrible point. There were some people of his Jews who needed a place in the sun, and Levi had supplied it to them out of his, Linton's, life. Levi may have made more money on him by continuing the loan, but that was not really what Levi had been after. Someone had to be dispossessed so that his relations might have a home. Linton realized with a sinking heart that he really had no chance. His whole life had been lost the moment he crossed Levi's threshold. He had been dealing not with a man, but a whole people. Now that is a fundamental issue that we have to deal with. Do you remember the story of Kanye? What happened to Kanye West? He lost $1 billion overnight because he said one word that he's not allowed to say. He said the Jews. He lost all that money. And then Dave Chappelle, I remember him, he went on Saturday Night Live, and he said, there is one thing, 2 words you could never bring together, the and Jews. And everybody laughed, okay? But there was a truth to what he said. But what am I talking about here? I'm talking about categories. Jack Nicklaus didn't have categories, and so he couldn't understand what was going on. What categories didn't he have? Labor, didn't understand that as a source of value, and usury, didn't understand that. And so as a result, he ended up a slave in the company that he founded. The other category is the Jews. This is not some type of abstract economic forces that are completely independent of human agency. It's labor or it's usury. It's the Catholic alternative or it's the Jewish alternative. It's Main Street or it's Wall Street. That's it. They're the only 2 options, and it's up to us to understand that, to act on it, to have the courage to speak about it, and defend what is our patrimony, which is the manufacturing base of the Midwest, which made this a prosperous country. Thank you. Thank you. I will be happy to answer any questions you have. So, Dominicans first. You think you're better than St. Thomas Aquinas, don't you? You think you're... No, go. I'm sorry for it. Go ahead. No, let's say a father has a question. Okay. We'll get to you next.
I'm a little confused with when you talk about usury. It's not all loaning money, it's compound interest. Is that correct?
Yes, compound interest is the basis of usury. Now, the general term is...
The Catholic way would be just a small interest or...
Simple interest.
Simple interest.
Simple interest is known as a fee.
Yeah.
So you can say, look, I'll lend you $1,000, but you're going to pay me a fee of 5% or 10%. You fix the fee, it does not compound, and so there's a fixed sum. All right, here's $100, I'm paying you 10%, we're done. There's nothing wrong with it. That is what the Monte di Pietà got involved in, and it turned into a huge battle between the Dominicans and the Franciscans, whether 5% was usury or 5% was a fee. And eventually the whole thing went bust for a lot of complicated reasons, which you can read about in the book. But yes, simple interest there's nothing immoral about simple interest.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Why is it, or how did it come about that this one group of people got so much power?
Okay, you need to breathe the Jewish revolutionary spirit, which is what I dealt with. So I wrote this book right after the economic crash. I wrote the Jewish revolutionary spirit in 2003, the invasion of Iraq. Wait a minute, why are we invading Iraq? The government is now controlled by a group of people that are known as neoconservatives. It's Jews who are using American foreign policy to benefit Israel. Did you benefit from the war from Iraq? No, nobody here benefited. So how did they get to that fact? Well, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to define what a Jew is. What is a Jew? They won't tell you. You have to go back to the time when Jesus Christ, the Messiah, comes to this earth. And at this point, the Hebrew people, God's chosen people, have to decide, are we going to accept them or are we going to reject them? And the majority rejected them. Now that is the Logos. That's the Logos incarnate. When you reject the Logos, you're rejecting the order of the universe. You become a revolutionary. And they ratified that by choosing Barabbas. And so they have, in a sense, the gift that was given to the chosen people, and now they're using it to destroy Logos wherever they can find it. Not just usury, pornography. By the way, did you know that abortion is a fundamental Jewish value? Did you know that? How many people know that? This is the biggest change that has taken place since Roe versus Wade. The Jews have come out and said abortion is a fundamental Jewish value. They never said that before. Now what does this mean? If you think that killing an innocent child is a fundamental value, you're not worshiping Yahweh, you're worshiping Moloch. Well, now we know. Well, why are we pretending these people are our friends? This is part of the problem here. We have to wake up and realize that Jesus Christ told us that we would always have enemies and we're to love our enemies. We're not supposed to pretend that our enemies are our friends. That's what Shylock did. That's what we have to wake up to. So that's how they got the power. So specifically, how they get the power? Usury. They got so much money that they can buy up the entire Congress. So I was in Mashhad in Iran. I said there are 3 reasons why you Iranians don't have a nuclear agreement. Sheldon Adelson, Paul Singer, Bernard Marcus. 3 rich Jews determine our foreign policy to the detriment of the Iranian people and the American people. How did they get that money? What was Sheldon Adelson? Casino, usury. The guy who's Dan Gilbert, Quicken Loans, the richest guy in Ohio now. This is how they get their money, and then they use it to buy up the media, and that's how they control our thought. And we are now supposed to think that we're bad people if we talk about it. No, that's got to stop. We have to assert our identity as Catholics, Midwest Catholics, the people, the group that created the wealth of this country, that created a prosperous United States of America because of manufacturing, which produces wealth, and because of decent wages of the sort that were paid in Detroit. That's what made this country great, and ever since the time that they have risen in power, we have lost money, and we're becoming poorer and poorer and poorer. So I did a story on Michigan. I'm coming back from doing a story, and the media guy with me points out strip mall on Route 10 in Michigan. Completely empty except with 2 exceptions. Dollar General and pot. A pot shop selling marijuana. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's your future. Smoke dope, go to Dollar General, and be happy. Yes, sir.
Okay, you know how Hitler tried to eliminate the Jews, inoculate them. Can you explain? It seemed like he wasn't as bad a guy as I thought he was then, if he tried to get rid of the bad people. What do you think? Is it a good question or not?
Is this a loaded question? Do you have your tape? Are you from the ADL? Do you have your tape recorder running? First of all, it's a long, complicated story. There are articles in Culture Wars where you can deal about, I'm doing a book called The Holocaust, the Holocaust narrative. This is a narrative that came into being with a political purpose in mind after World War II. People like Eisenhower were on board. It's a long, complicated story, but basically it's a narrative that is basically the fundamental narrative of the American Empire, and proves that we are good people because we rescued the Jews from Hitler. So, happy to come and give you a talk on that as well, but that's the best I can do in the short amount of time that we have. And now turn off your tape recorder and tell the ADL to, no, don't do that.
One of the things
things I want to make sure that he's got an extensive history of writing about that particular culture, okay? And it's very important, it's extensive, and the books are this thick. He explains a lot of things. So this isn't the topic of conversation. What we're trying to do is determine the importance of usury as a sin, as an immoral thing, So that's what we're trying to dial into here. And so we're setting up a means for the church, for the people, and it's important that we stay focused on that issue. It gets pretty extensive, and it could be, like I said, the Jewish revolutionary spirit is that thick, okay? And he explains it. Well, it's extensive, it really is, and but it's another thing, because I sold out to a company just like Jack Nicklaus did. I didn't even know it. I didn't know what I was doing, because everybody did that, okay? Because that was what you did once you got your earnings up to a certain point, and you do what Jack Nicklaus did.
He wanted silver buckles on his shoes.
I did. But that's really what a whole management team around me wanted as well. So it's a culture. So there's a lot of propaganda to get. And so I signed a 3-year agreement to run the company. And it was probably the 3 toughest years of my life, just because the whole business changed, because I did not run it for the people, for my family. I ran it for people from Tennessee. They weren't Jewish, okay? They were not Jewish, okay? They were, in my estimation, the power of darkness, because all this money came. Where'd it come from? Well, that gets into that spirit, the money magic. Yeah, well, that's another thing too. But the point that I'm trying to say, I've experienced it. I think a lot of us have experienced some of these things, these principles. So we're just trying to stay on topic. Well, the Jewish subject is another subject. It is an important subject to understand because of who we worship. However, usury is a real problem. It's a very big problem. Go ahead, Bob.
Maybe just say something about how you're protecting the value of our labor through the silver coin.
Right, labor needs to be protected.
Yeah, well, that's what Tim's doing.
Yeah, that's
I
our
know,
system.
I'm trying to figure out what he's doing. It's not easy. Because, he's done something. I've written something, he's done something. And I've written about the whole development of economics and all these principles, and now I'm confronted with an actual situation, and I'm being honest with you, I'm trying to figure out what he's doing.
It's not that hard. I'll write about that.
Yeah, and I'm going to get into silver mining too. No, you do the silver, I'll do the book.
But it is true. It is, when you take this book, it's a work of art, if you will. If you take it, what he's done is he's pulled from church, the resources of church teaching and history, and he's put it into a finite book that I was able to gain a lot of understanding from. And then I began to apply that to what we are doing here. So, and he's confused. Because we tried to do it, and so we're doing it. And that's what's unique. So, and I think, go ahead.
So where does almsgiving fit into this
At the
scenario?
very top.
Where does almsgiving fit in? Well, first of all, if you're talking about the English economic system, it doesn't fit in. It doesn't fit in at all. Have you watched A Christmas Carol? Where they come to Scrooge and ask him for alms for the poor? No, no. Decrease the surplus population. That is exactly what Nassau Senior, an economist nobody knows about, said during the Irish potato famine. The Irish potato famine was supposed to be solved by free trade. Well, it wasn't. And they were exporting food at the same time. So if your neighbor is in need, he has a call on your money. You better give him something, because otherwise you will be called to account for what you didn't give to the poor when they needed the money. Is that part of an economic system? I think it probably was. If you go back to the medieval era when the world was ruled by Dominicans and Franciscans, even if they fought with each other. And that's what the Monte de Pietà was. It was, in a sense, a pawn shop, but it was an attempt to alleviate the lot of the poor through economic means. So you have a situation, okay, there are nuns who are starving. Well, I have an obligation to help them. I would love to create an economic system that would ban Matumba and create prosperity, but before I can do that, I have to help people who are in immediate need. I think that's the best way I can answer your question.
I don't know if that answered it, but is that answering your question, or how does?
Well,
what do you mean?
I mean,
Yeah.
yes, it's an answer, but the question relates more to, if I give money to an organization that is, requesting funds, needing, am I feeding this into a system that is going to be, taking advantage of me ultimately, or the company that, or the people you're trying to help?
And these are the complex issues that we're addressing. What we've done is we've created the system. We only have one system, and everybody's in it. And what we're trying to do is create a parallel system. Okay, that the church itself can benefit from. That's our goal. Okay, and the economics of the system that we're all in, it ends badly, no matter what. And so each individual, your each individual moral decision to give a tithe is in itself a good thing. The money itself is not. And that's what we're trying to teach. Okay, but that's what you're doing a good. You're doing what you're supposed to do. But it has been over the course of 110 years that our system is designed to fail. And so what we're trying to do is first off take and put in place a path forward for our community and for the Dominicans. And if the diocese or any church, we want to be able to teach the principles, the sound principles of Catholic social teaching, so that this does not end badly for everyone, so that we pick up the pieces and go.
Right. Yes, Father.
I was gonna say, with the giving and the tithing, there's a happiness factor here. And the great motivation of everything that we do is to make ourselves happy. We participate in hobbies, the career we seek out, the spouses we seek out, the vocation we follow. It's all a thing of happiness. And so one of the greatest producers of happiness is charity, of living in God's love. And so when we can have enough wealth to actually be able to help others gratuitously, is the greatest source of happiness. And so that's why when he says the top, he's right. When we arrive to a moment in life where we can help others gratuitously without damaging our own state, that's when we're the happiest.
St. Bernardine of Siena said that usury destroys business and charity.
Yep. Because it takes away the surplus.
Destroys business and charity.
Yep.
So he obviously made the distinction, but they were compatible in a way that usury is not. Destroys both of them.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
It's just a comment. Listening to you, it's just I want to read the books too.
Good. Go out and buy it.
To
Right?
understand better, but it just came to mind immediately that usually in our own lives, how so many people are very much into credit cards, and I mean, I know people that pay and pay and pay, and it keeps going up and up and up, and they keep spending and spending and spending, and they never get out of it,
Right.
you know? I know people, especially in my country, there's so many cases like that, you know, that I'm like, but these are 2 salaries, what's going on, you know? And they never get out of it.
That's right.
And the other thing is, like, I think about usury from one country to another, like China and the United States, how we are so enslaved with China, how we owe so much, you know, and it's just the hope of the United States, because, you know, they give us money and we think, oh, they are so nice. That happens with the Chinese that now are in my country, and instead of the Taiwanese, you know, everybody opens up to the Chinese, and then they don't understand that, okay, something is coming after that, you know? So
Yeah.
it's something, I think it's very important to be aware of it, you
Right.
know? That's the very first thing.
Right. I think one of the most pernicious institutions in our culture right now is higher education. And I say it's pernicious
Yes.
because it's crappy education. You'll never read a decent book now. But the main problem is you have to go in debt to do it. And so you're leading all these young people into debt slavery, and they think they're doing a good thing. And suddenly, you know what? I can't get married because I have this debt. I can't join the religious order because I have all this debt. This is really pernicious, and we have to warn young people against it.
One of the things that we've tried to do is create a way of building wealth through labor. So I used to rent our farm to a local farmer, okay? And the produce was sold into to a market. So what we're trying to do, and he also does as well, his name's Jeremy Gable. We got a member of that family here. But anyway, what we're trying to do is we have two laborers, and actually more than that, but we're building from our land, but we have to have labor. And so we raise food, we raise pork and eggs and things of this nature, and we sell them. That's wealth. And we're trying to teach that not only is it what we're doing with freight farms, with our produce, that's wealth, okay? And so we're setting this for sale with a non-usurious unit of account, which is silver, so that we can begin to teach people how the Catholic Church, the community of the Dominicans, can begin to build wealth, and we can trade back and forth. So this is a very extensive undertaking, because we're trying to apply things that we've never really even considered as a people, because we don't even, I didn't know where money came from until I got money, and then I had to study money, and then I started to read books, and that's part of being Dominican, that you take a societal problem, a contemporary problem, and you study it, and then you offer a solution. And so what we're trying to do is offer a solution, and it's very hard. I mean, just look at this book. That's just one little segment of this complex issue. So anyway, go ahead, Father.
Could you just simply define the difference between currency and money? Because you work here for currency to
Well, some
translate
people
that.
actually,
to
some
actual
people
money.
actually do take their wealth, their labor's wages, in money. Money in our system is a silver unit, and the currency is a note. It's issued as a debt.
Just paper.
It's paper or a digit. It's actually digits. So it's something that's created from nothing. Okay, they just can create it at will. And so ours, they have to mine the silver, they have to transport the silver, they have to crush the silver, they have to refine
even
the
in this-
silver, stamp the silver, ship the silver. So there's value in that commodity that we trade.
But they started out, our currency was money. It was connected to silver, They
We
took
did
it
not
off.
have currency, we had silver.
We
and
had,
gold
yeah, and
And
then
copper.
they
And-
pulled a scheme on us.
Yeah.
They removed it from the silver, so there's nothing backing our money now.
Correct.
Other than it's
That is
total
correct.
debt.
I'd like, one of the areas that I'm trying to reconcile here is his understanding of silver and my understanding of money. Because if you read the book, it basically, over this period of time, the imprint of the sovereign on that piece of metal became the most important thing. And so the crucial thing, moment that I described in the book is your friend Adolf Hitler. In the 1930s, after he took power, had been boycotted by the Bank of England and the United States. They would not let him have gold. And so if you don't have gold, you have no backing for your currency. And Hitler had a genius by the name of Hjalmar Schacht, who was his finance minister, was the finance minister in the 20s. And he basically resurrected the German economy without one piece of gold. And what he showed is, and this is the definition of money that I came up with, is what is money? It's credit based on the future labor of the nation, which is insured by the sovereign. That's all Germany did. You can't do that forever. You can't become Zimbabwe. You think you've got the economy of Germany and you're printing money. No, you can't do that. There's limits to this. But basically what Hitler did was he injected money into the economy through labor. He built the Autobahn. And he hired people to do this. He's the only man who got his country out of the Depression. Roosevelt didn't. Because he didn't have the understanding, he didn't have the courage of his convictions, and he also thought that gold was important. He stole gold from everybody in the United States of America because he felt that he needed it. No, you don't need it. What you need is labor. He went directly to labor as a source of value. He said, I'm going to pay you. I guarantee that you will be paid because I am the sovereign, and that money circulated through the economy, and they resurrected the German economy. So this is part of what we're trying to work out here.
Anything else? Okay. Father, will you lead us in a prayer to close out?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen.
Lord Jesus, you came into our world with nothing, and you gave us everything. Help us to understand the meaning of both those terms. As we praise you and give you thanks for the wonderful country in which we live, which oftentimes deceives what we think it is, help us to be truly wise and understanding. Help us appreciate the value of labor. St. Joseph the Worker, Labor Day that we celebrate, and what it means to us. Give us the rewards of our labor, and ask that we be always aware that all good comes from you. And we make our prayers through Jesus Christ, your Son, who came to bring us everything in the love of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Tell them that we're okay, I'll tell them. Well, you tell us. Since I'm gonna talk to Tim, but I just told them that we're finished. It was either 10:30 or 11, and they picked 11 that we would be finished. So
That's okay.
we might have to wait a few minutes before
That's all right.
lunch is ready.
Well, he's going to be back at the table. He'll sign and he'll sign. And goodbye. Yeah, thank you.